as you said, there are so many ways that can cause shoulder pain. How do you make the diagnosis?
Sorry, I missed the first
Sorry,
part.
how do you make the diagnosis? Like it is.
Oh, okay, yeah, great
Yeah.
question. That's probably something I meant to say and
Yeah.
neglected on the way. Yeah, so as a general approach, so if people come into our office, so basically what we're trying to do, first of all, from a sort of history perspective, like what hurts, where it hurts, and what you were doing, or what you're doing on a daily basis, that's a big deal. And it kind of provides us with a way to cheat a little bit. So if it's a swimmer, we know they're more prone to a few things versus someone doing, reaching occupational. Basically, our approach is to start with the big picture as far as certain functional movements. So for example, we know that if you reach up with a shoulder like this, right, first of all, you should have more or less full range in the sense that your arm should be able to more or less touch your ear. And we know when that happens, it should be coordinated in the sense of at least 60 degrees should be coming from that shoulder blade with 120 degrees coming. So how is it distributed? So we know that if, for example, if that shoulder blade is moving way too much and the rotator cuff is probably going to be tight because it's restricting motion at the glenohumeral joint itself. Or vice versa, if you're just getting way too much movement from that glenohumeral joint, that shoulder blade's not moving, it's probably more of a shoulder blade problem because that's where the mechanical deficit is. All right, we can also do tests, same principle with things like rotation. We can also do things having people do push-ups or pulling on things to see what's the order of contraction, or basically comparing what should happen in an ideal situation with some of these tests versus what is happening. All right? And once we know that, so for example, like I said with that rotator cuff, there's maybe 3 or 4 muscles that might be the main culprit that's restricting this motion. So then we can do some other tests to kind of cross-reference, or we can go in there and we can actually palpate those muscles to see, is it getting bound up, is it tight, can we find some of the scar tissue in there, or what's going on. So the idea is to start with the big picture, so kind of, when we have that step 1, 2, 3, from a diagnostic perspective, you want to start with step 3 to see what are the big movements or the mechanical issues. And from that, what might be causing those, whether a strength and flexibility problem in sort of these local muscles. And then it's once we find those local muscles as far as, again, if there's sort of a strength issue in this infraspinatus, why is there that strength issue there? Is it just deconditioned? Is there some other issue where the body's not contracting that muscle because it would put more strain on another area? Or is there scar tissue in there? So you can see where there's a couple levels of sort of diagnosis there. It's kind of working backwards. And then again, from the treatment perspective, you work the other way, sort of tissue health and strength, and then rebuild those sort of global patterns. Does that answer that okay? Or?
Let's say you're past that first step. Now you're moving on to the recovery process. So what can you recommend here for exercises to balance that?
Yeah. So were you one of the ones that didn't get a packet?
Yeah, I got the packet right
here. Okay. Yes. Yeah. So
he's in worse shape than I am.
Yeah. So in that packet, we sort of have there is like a a 3 or 4 page sort of thing. So that's sort of a general starting point, and that's a lot of those step 2 sort of exercises. Assuming everything's working in step 2, sort of global exercises like shoulder presses, push-ups, stuff like that. Those just tend to work very well to balance stuff out. The biggest thing from a keeping the shoulder healthy perspective with doing exercise is balance, right? So if you work certain muscles more than other muscles, it creates a strength imbalance. It just pulls harder than the other. So the big deal is not neglecting some muscles. We tend to do a lot of pushing type of stuff in the gym. And one of the other things that is less realized is we think push-pull to balance. But the big thing is with the lat. We think of the lat as a pull, but the lat attaches on the front. So it actually, from a mechanical perspective, pulls everything forward. So you got to make sure you add stuff for back of the rotator cuff and those like rows and things like that where you squeeze the shoulder blades together. Because that'll work more shoulder blade muscles. So it's just getting some balance in there with making sure you're not really just overdeveloping certain muscles at the expense of others. Yeah.
To get an assessment, come see you. Do you go to the doctor or just go directly to you?
So I'm a chiropractor, which is primary care, so you don't need a referral to see me. Mostly it's covered if you do not buy provincial insurance, but any private insurance, if you have any coverage like that, it should be okay. Normally you don't need any note or anything like that. Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. And if you have specific questions about your situation or insurance, you can ask me afterwards. There's no way you're ever going to throw a baseball 100 miles an hour. I mean, it's just impossible. Frozen shoulder is
I ever got to but
you get the point. Yeah, and frozen shoulder is one of those ones where, and again, when we talk about ART versus something else, it's not that ART is the best thing ever for X or Y or frozen shoulder or rotator cuff. The idea is that if those adhesions are part of the presentation or the pathology, which is really, really common, that ART is one of the best things and one of the few things that actually deals with it, right? So that's sort of the idea. Frozen shoulder is, of all the stuff we talked about, that's kind of the biggest sort of question mark, because there's so many. You can have frozen shoulder without any of those adhesions, and if you don't have adhesion,
you move the shoulder, I can feel like sound
Yeah.
on motion as opposed to the other one.
yeah.
Is that these adhesions or is this?
The sound is probably not the adhesion. It's probably, it could be grinding if there's any cartilage breakdown. It could be things snapping and moving where muscles are moving over each other. So the sound itself is probably not going to be from the adhesions, but the restricted motion very well might be. And I mean, that's I guess the difference, right? So that's where I'm seeing it. I can't say, I'm not saying other practitioners are bad. I'm just saying that this ART works really good for this sort of handful of issues. Yeah, sorry, did you have a question?
Yeah, just kind of a general question.
Yeah.
If you have injured your shoulder, say rotator cuff or bursitis or
Yeah.
something, and you find 10 years down the road that shoulder is continually weak
Mhm.
and inflexible,
Yeah.
is that probably the scar tissue that's...
Very likely so. Yeah. So that's the exact sort of thing with, we talked about if there was more of an acute injury type of thing, right? So that scar tissue, so things heal in the sense of they're not necessarily inflamed or tender or painful, but the mechanics are still a little bit off. So with any type of sort of acute injury, if there's tearing, inflammation, even if for a small amount, there's going to be some of that scar tissue in there. It's just the way the body heals. So the question is it still in there? Because, well, if nothing's been done, then it's still going to be in there. But is the body able to compensate? The other thing that will happen with injury, and this is why it's really important to get things looked at as opposed to just waiting to hopefully feel better, is if those mechanics are off a little bit, if the body learns to move a little bit of a different way in the short term because there's injury in through there, it doesn't necessarily automatically go back to the other way. So sometimes the mechanics are off, which over the course of years, especially over the course of a decade, that's going to load up other structures, which could slowly kind of break down. And so that's the issue. But yeah, that's a huge common one with some of the scar tissue and stuff like that for sure. Chronic stuff. Yeah.